Do you know what? I read the description of this event, which made me laugh, which was like, ask me anything, brackets, within reason. Is this the end of reporting, like as we know it? I don't think so. I do think, though, that the way we access information will change. How much time do we need to cook this so that it's good enough to get to market? But at the same time, we're not spending so much time on it that by the time we ship it, that we're actually out of date and our customers have already chosen different platforms. We could discover new drugs within minutes and hours, and we could develop new treatments or discover new molecules in ways that are impossible today because the calculations would take 100 years to run.
All right. So thanks everybody for coming today. Welcome to the UK Azure User Group in our sunny June. My name is Richard Conway, if some of you don't know me, and today I'm here with, I've been really looking forward to this chat with Alex from Microsoft. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey everyone, so my name's Alex. I'm a AI solution architect, effectively, within what's called the Microsoft Innovation Hub. For those that are familiar with Microsoft terminology, it used to be called the Microsoft Technology Center. So if you've ever heard of the MTC, that's where I work. So I'm running lots of AI-focused workshops with clients regularly. So I've seen a lot. In fact, that's how
That's exactly how we met. Yeah. Fantastic in front of a customer.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a joint customer we were working with, and it was good fun to work together. And we were saying that we should continue the conversation, right?
100%. And I think one of the key reasons that I wanted to speak with you is because the way, like for me, I've been focusing on lines of business and legal, but the way that I saw you think about that customer's problem and solutionize on day was absolutely fantastic. I thought there really is a skill in being able to listen to something new and just, because a lot of times our customers don't actually tell us what they really want. You have to prize it out of them. So
it can be hard work at times.
So that's really my first question. When you come into this new scenario with a customer, how do you process all of this stuff that's coming at you?
Well, it really depends on the customer. I mean, the first thing when I'm like designing, for example, like a client engagement or a workshop or something like that, the first thing that is like always number one on the agenda is kind of just that listening phase and just hearing about what's the current state, how they do things. And what's interesting is as well is that they'll think they have a use case and they'll be like, this is what we're going to do, and this is definitely the thing, and for sure this is it. What I found is you've got to give them the opportunity to kind of put that case out and tell themselves a bit about what the current state is. But through listening and through hearing and through some probing questions, you're going to quickly realize in a lot of cases that what they're asking for or what they think is the answer is not really truly the answer. And so it's a skill you kind of learn over time, especially hearing and also encountering lots of different customers and the pitfalls that you've seen along the way. I think it's knowing when to ask the right question and when to actually be silent. We were talking about a person we know in common, Neil. Neil was really great at just silence, and what you'll find is actually just saying nothing. The customer is going to actually come up with a lot more of that extra detail that potentially that you wouldn't have got if you'd have tried to fill that silence with some information. So certainly for the start of it, you've just got to take a step back. If you work with salespeople alongside you, also need to work with them to make sure that they're not jumping to the solution. I work with a lot of salespeople, and they've got a cart of things that they want to sell to the customer, and in a lot of cases I probably don't want them in the room because the answer is this, because that's what I'm compensated on, and so that's another challenge you have to work through. But yeah, you're spinning plates a lot.
Yeah.
My first starting point though is give them the opportunity to talk themselves. Have a bit of silence, have some probing questions, and then what you'll find and you'll uncover during that journey is maybe this isn't the exact thing, and maybe it is, and that's fine, but let them talk first. Is the start.
Okay. One of the things that I'm really curious about, because my own experience in front of customers, especially with newer Microsoft technologies, we can encounter so much resistance, sometimes some hostility, when we talk about things that we've done before or solutions that we've, or patterns and practices, and sometimes some of our would-be or new customers that we're trying to sell to don't actually believe us and challenge us all the way. So I'm gonna start with quite a controversial question. I'll take you back 12 months ago when
we haven't pre-prepared this question. I don't know what's coming. This is completely off the cuff.
So Microsoft Fabric is obviously doing very well now. It's breaking ground as almost a complete data ecosystem, and there are new features being added all the time to it. But 12 months ago, it was actually quite difficult to talk to customers about it when things didn't work, when customers were waiting for basic things like networking. How did you handle those sessions at a time where you've got an entire sales force going, Microsoft Fabric does everything, and then you have to deal with the cold end of reality?
Do you know what? It's an interesting one, because as Microsoft products go, the acceleration of Fabric specifically has been amazing. And like what it is today is, and this is a conversation I'm having with customers a lot, is that like, oh, we've looked at Fabric, it's not the thing. It's like, when did you look at Fabric? Yeah. Was it 18 months ago? Because it's a completely different product now. In terms of the reality, I remember I had an interesting conversation with our product group once around like products, and it was, we could build something that's perfect and ship it, but by the time we've done that, we've missed out on a kind of a gap, right? There's going to be a development time. And so it's you see this obviously with video games now. There's always early release and early access and stuff like that. And so the challenge for a development team and our engineering group is, how much time do we need to cook this so that it's good enough to get to market, but at the same time, and adds value, but at the same time, we're not spending so much time on it that by the time we ship it, that we're actually out of date and our customers have already chosen different platforms that it's hard to get them out of. So I sympathize with the product group, because it was like they needed to get something to market. And I think there is a feeling that, like, obviously Fabric at the point of when it was shipped, the other problem we encountered was obviously it was hyped up massively, and obviously a lot of people were very excited about it, and then obviously the reality of day one capability versus what they actually wanted in a lot of cases, there was a product mismatch. In terms of how I dealt with that, or manage those kind of conversations, I think there has to be a level of reality, and don't shy away from like, what their requirements are. The key thing is, what do they actually need? Like, what's the capability that customer needs? And for day one customers of Fabric, there were customers that were getting a lot of value from Fabric in its day one state. But there were other customers that had, very specific, security requirements on certain different things that actually it didn't meet all of their requirements. And at that point, I'm not going to propose that as the answer, because again, back to the salespeople will still try selling it, but if it's not the right solution for them. So ultimately, it comes back to what's the capabilities that they need. And if the product set doesn't provide that, then you have to have that conversation about whether that's the right decision or the right fit. And that's when it's good to have the salespeople out of the room, because I might be suggesting a different direction, right, than what they might like.
Yeah. So you reminded me of that old proverb that I think Reid Hoffman came up with, the founder of LinkedIn
guy.
Yeah. If you, what was it he said now? It was one of these famous phrases, like you'll find from Einstein. If the first version of your product doesn't have loads of bugs in it, then you ship too late.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is 100%, and this is the conversation I've had with the product group, is that if you wait too long and you try and build the perfect thing, by the time that you actually get to market, it's too late. And so, it's that kind of dichotomy. I think where Fabric is now, it's almost unrecognizable from what was shipped on day one, for sure.
Well, where do you so I'm looking at Fabric, I'm seeing all these, I always quote to some of our customers that 2026 is now going to be the year of the ontology. And, I saw a lot of investment go into a graph engine, into like a different kind of use case for Fabric, so that you can you can build all these wonderful organizational graphs and models and then apply AI on top of them. How do you see this genesis from data platform morph into this world of AI with complex organizational knowledge graphs and where people have knowledge on tap?
It's a good question. I think, it's one of those ones where we want this capability, this AI, to be able to do these things, and then we're working back from and unpicking, like, how do we actually realistically do that? So obviously, traditional data platforms and stuff like that, data warehouses and stuff like that still have value in what they do, but we're having to become a little bit smarter with the way that we structure our data to make it more efficient for AI systems or non-human entities to find that information. So obviously stuff like graph and indexing information and stuff like that becomes really, really prevalent. What's interesting is now the types of queries that people are asking are, some bits of it require understanding of context in a rich corpus of text, but we need to then combine that with structured queries of structured data in numerical value to get an answer. And some of this stuff is getting quite complicated in the back end of how that all gets stitched together. But the way that we do that, if we forget about the complexity of the coordination, is the data that's structured in a way that we can actually access and make those SQL queries that we need to do? And is that rich corpus of text indexed and chunked in a way that is easy for it to access? And then these kind of MCP connections or multi-agent systems are able to then search against it. That's where the capability is coming from. So I don't have many customers coming in to me saying, I really want, we have some customers, like that joint customer that has a very clear vision of a very complicated data system that they want. But most are coming to us saying that we want this AI assistant or AI agent system that can do this thing. And then when you're unpicking that, you realize that actually, we need these X, Y, and Z systems. And I'm seeing more and more requests for the structured information alongside the unstructured information and bringing those together, which is when this stuff gets a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the most amazing and quickest wins that I find is to be able to curate your data and build a semantic layer and then place a data agent on top of it. And one of the things that I'm finding with customers, and I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on this, because from a usability perspective, it's a mixed bag whether people think that reporting is taking a different form.
Yes.
Do we want information at our fingertips and just ask for the things that we want to know now, or do we actually want to go through and understand trends and drill throughs, or is it a combination of both? And I guess the postfix to that question is, with the advent of Power BI Copilot, which now takes a lot of the complexity around actually building the report
and serving
exactly, should we be thinking now of bringing our users on that journey so that they have so that as the intermediaries, we deal with the data, we deal with the transformation, the semantic layer, and then we give them the ability to present this in whatever way that they want, and we take a back step away from that?
So it's a really good question, and I've actually had quite a few workshops with clients recently where they've been posing questions to me like, is reporting dead? Is this at the end of reporting as we know it? I don't think so. I do think, though, that the way we access information will change. I think the amount of reports, I've had a few finance big banks coming in, and they have 5,000 reports that the Power BI team has to manage, right, on a monthly basis. And we're looking at, can we reduce that significantly to a much more finite set of reports? But the other things, because in a lot of cases, there's a report for Bob, because Bob really likes his report like this. Do we need to be managing that on an ongoing basis? Open question, right? Maybe Bob needs that dashboard, and that's fine. But there's a question that if Bob could just ask a question of the data and get his response of what he really needs, then there is a question of like whether that report is required. So there's this conversation we're having about like consolidation of reporting. Now, obviously with stuff like Power BI Copilot, stuff like that, you can obviously then have the report, and then you can use it to build yourself something out and also actually ask questions of the report. And that is really, really powerful. What I've been seeing recently with a lot of this AI stuff, especially with stuff like co-work and like Copilot, well, Copilot Studio to a certain degree, but more like VS Code and GitHub Copilot, is just the ability to instantly generate a HTML page. And that, is kind of one of this, but it's something I'm seeing more, like where it's so easy to just generate like a report on the fly in HTML that like if I want a cut of something, it's like, here it is, and here's in something really instant that's like a visual. Now, what's the problems with that? Well, if you're outside of this Power BI ecosystem, it's a HTML page. Well, what's your user access on that? What's your your data hygiene on that? If you generate a HTML page, it's static. If data changes, it ain't going to get updated. So there's like a lot of things that obviously are limitations to doing it that way. And I'm not saying that that's the end goal. But what I'm seeing more and more of, certainly internally in the way that we work, is that like my boss will ask for something and it'd be like, here's a HTML cut of exactly what you're looking for, and it's there for right now. It's just for you to use right now. It doesn't age, but it's there. And that's what I'm seeing more of actually, is that like these just instant pages that are kind of throwaway. Obviously for stuff that's more programmatic and structured, obviously with like again the reports, and obviously with the HTML page, like I mentioned, there's a load of other issues and gubbins that you need to think about in terms of like sharing it and whatever. But because it's so good at doing that, it's just kind of crazy. And I'm seeing like working patterns change because it's like, oh, well, I can just spin up a HTML page. Oh, there it is. And the barrier to entry, and especially if you have the connections into your data platform and stuff like that, you can do that. So like we have an internal agent that we've built that runs within VS Code, and it has access to our CRM systems. It has access to our Outlook and stuff, so it knows everything about all of the workshops that are happening. So when my boss asks, and now she's not, we've actually set her up with this agent as well, so she's now is not even asking us so much, which is actually good. But she'll literally ask a question, or if we will ask the question of the agent to be like, what's happening next week, and provide a report on that, and it will create this HTML page which is like everything happening next week, and with the specifics on what she wants for this ask that she's got, that we don't have to build a new report for, and it's a one moment ask sort of thing. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I don't know if that's the direction. I'm just seeing, because of the technology being so good at that, I'm seeing that more and more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I was going to. It's something that what I'm about to ask you, we go through ourselves now, but Microsoft's like diversity across customers is just immense. We were speaking about a vet. We're talking about law firms. You've got oil giants. You've got big banks. So it could be anything from one day to the other that you have to learn. How, when you have to showcase things to customers and you want to try and contextualize it better, how have AI tools changed your workflow for those customer sessions?
So the way that we used to work in the MTC Now Innovation Hub was, and we still do this, in the open welcome area we have a selection of demos, and these are kind of flash things. I think some things are made of Lego. There's other things that are, like pretty nice flashy things that you walk past, right? They've somewhat become ornaments now. So as you walk in, you kind of see these cool things. If I want to do a demo for a customer now, my kind of go-to is download the transcript of the meeting so far on a coffee break, feed it to GitHub Copilot with some extra context that I'm going to feed it of what I want it to show, and then just letting it go, and then going to grab a coffee, leaving it in autopilot mode, so just no approval needed from me. Go grab myself a coffee, come back, and maybe I'll have to have a bit of a back and forth after that. But in a lot of cases, it's able to showcase something pretty nice. And the nice thing about my workshops, is I'm exploring what's the current state, and then I'm exploring what's the ideal future state, what's the ideal capability that you want. Now, the capability in some cases might be a Power BI report, right? And I could build a Power BI report, but I might build just a quick HTML page just to show them what it could look like. The reality is that maybe it'll be in Power BI, or maybe it'll be in their line of business application. But it's completely fundamentally changed the way I showcase things to customers, because before we would have a retail demo, but like that retail demo is kind of out of, like, it's old, and it's also not customized to their exact problem, because it might be a retail customer, but maybe I have their HR department in. You know, showing them a demo with a rack of clothes is not really relevant to the HR team within that customer. But showcasing, like, you know, a demo that shows the whole HR end-to-end process reimagined, that kind of, the only problem I would say with doing that is I have done it to some customers. They're like, I want that, I want to buy it right now. And it's like, okay, well, you vibe coded that in 2 minutes. That's the whole thing. And I'm like, right, okay, yes, true, but there's a lot of extra work that we'll need to do.
Now I know why you don't want sales in the room.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be like, here's the contract.
You wouldn't be able to escape that conversation.
No, exactly, right. So, I mean, you know, it's a collaboration, but like that's the only danger of, you know, of showing something like immediately what they want, is you have that risk of like that being the thing, and then you get stuck on that, which is the flip side that I'm kind of balancing at the moment, is like how much you show versus tell. And I struggle with the vibe coding when I have like multiple things happening at the same time. My brain can't work it out.
Yeah.
So I'm the limitation there. Yeah. I like to have like, I'll have multiple chats potentially, but like, you know, I don't structured, but if too many things are changing at the same time, I lose track of the code base, and I don't really know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I always fall back to the fact that, you know, at the end of every vibe coded session, you need to be an engineer, right? You need to inspect the code, you need to understand it, you need to tweak it if you need to tweak it, you know, but you've got to be able to know what it's done.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there needs to be some technical knowledge behind it to at least validate, even structurally. Like, for example, like I vibe coded my website, and that was a really fun exercise to do that and give it like, here's my brand guidelines, here's the things I want a blog, and I want a contact page and stuff like that. But if you kind of just give it that, it will build a website, but it will use whatever it likes to build it. Whereas you might, you know, for example, in some of my demos, I like to do them as completely self-contained HTML files, like I was talking about, because with no dependencies. Because like, if you ask it to just make a HTML file, it's just going to run a load of dependencies to the files in the folder, and then when you give it to someone, they open it in their browser, nothing works. So it's like, you've got to really like be like, I want this HTML page completely self-contained, no dependencies, the X, Y, and Z, and like even asking those or telling it to do those. I know that's super basic, but like that's sort of stuff that you need to be kind of thinking about even before you hit that first prompt. Because if you just say, build me a website, I mean, there's a million different ways and different, like, you know, code bases that could draw upon to do that, just depending on what it feels like in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Do you? So, I mean, I think where Microsoft has positioned themselves with GitHub Copilot is really good. It's seen as a very serious developer tool.
It's a very great tool. Yeah.
Do you see? So, I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of like more formative, I think, less developer-centric vibe coding tools like Replit and Vercel and all that. Do you think this is an area that Microsoft will trend into?
Good question. Openly, I don't know. Because you could say stuff like Lovable and stuff like that. I mean, even like Claude Code and Codex to a certain degree, you would say are kind of competitors in that space. But having worked with stuff like Claude Code and Codex and messed around with them a bit more, they do kind of hide the code more from the user. Yeah. Like when I'm in GitHub Copilot, I feel like I'm an engineer with a superpower, whereas when I'm using some of those other tools, it's like it's building it for me, but I don't really know what it's doing, and I feel like I'm in less control. I'm more just like a magician kind of doing things. So
exactly.
I don't know if that's an area Microsoft would get into. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, like if you think about the Microsoft ecosystem, you've got stuff like Copilot off the shelf, then you've got Copilot Studio, then you've got the Azure, so you've got that full breadth. Yeah. Whether that's something that we'd ever get into in terms of like, potentially, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, going back to Fabric, I think the investment in Copilots in Fabric has been fantastic. I think some of the early stage I've been a long time user of Azure Data Explorer, but then a lot of people, as I've joined Acora, a lot of people, haven't been familiar with KQL. So just having the ability to have, a co-pilot which will write KQL for you, and I think it's a great learning aid as well, because if you study what this writes, it does what it says. It's not an autopilot; it's a co-pilot. So you write the code, you study the code, read and learn what it does, and you learn something new. So,
Totally, yeah.
So I think that Microsoft has done a really good job with how, its AI support in Fabric. Switching gears slightly towards AI Foundry. When I look at the Azure landscape now, and I did a bit of a census last year, and towards the end of last year, and from all of the conferences, there were only 2 announcements that were not AI announcements. You've got 2 major frameworks now in Azure that are basically going to, in my feel, are going to eventually encompass everything. Fabric and Foundry. Do you see this as start of more like a cloud operating stack, which is basically your data and AI stack? We don't need to worry about networking anymore because we've got managed VNets and things like that. How do you see this evolving to become less complex, where you don't have to worry about 200 different things and permutations that you can put together in the cloud?
Well, I think, which kind of came back to some of the stuff at Build that they've been building upon over the last few months around these IQ platforms. I think that's the kind of glue that we're looking for to connect things. Because
do you want to explain those platforms?
Sure. Yeah. So when you're, say, building an agent or something like that, you need to give it access to knowledge and context of your business, right? But in a lot of cases, that's been very siloed. You're building like a database or something like that for the agent to reason over, or it's been quite clunky. But what Microsoft's been doing is adding this IQ layer to all of the kind of major kind of data stacks, whether that be in Fabric and Microsoft 365 as well, is having like an AI intermediary that's going to help route and retrieve the right bit of information for you based on your request. So you're kind of outsourcing the quite complex understanding of query capture to these kind of IQ platforms. So because the thing that surprised me, so I've been at Microsoft for 5.5 years. I used to be a customer of Microsoft. When I was a customer of Microsoft, I saw Microsoft as Microsoft, just one entity. When you join Microsoft, you realize that actually there's a lot of subdomains and businesses within Microsoft, because Microsoft does so many different things, and you have different product groups and engineering and stuff like that. And so you have like a whole area of Microsoft that's Microsoft 365, Word, Office, Teams, productivity. You have a whole part of Microsoft that's Azure and and data and AI. And then you have other parts of Microsoft. And what you realize is they're not always talking to each other. And so what we're trying to do with these IQ platforms is make it easier, so no matter where you're building an agent or wherever you're trying to access that data, you can connect to it easier. So when you're building an agent in Foundry, you can connect to Work IQ and get access to that whole Microsoft graph of information that you would have in the M365 world. But at the same time, if I was building that same agent in Copilot Studio, I could connect to that same data source through the IQ platform. And this is, I think, what we're trying to simplify is the connection of those data sources to wherever you want them. And so I think that the difference is going to be is not necessarily in like where we build, but actually how we give whatever we're building, wherever we're building, access to the same information of the same quality. Because what we don't want is, I have to build an agent in Copilot Studio to get access to this data source. That's just silly. You want to build it wherever you're most comfortable building it based on the skills and the tech that you have, and that's what's approved within your organization. But you still want to access those data sources. And so having that IQ layer, I think, is going to be pretty critical.
That is hugely powerful, I think. You mentioned MCP, Alex. One of the things that I've seen over the years is that you start with a standard. It takes root. It doesn't quite do everything that you want it to do. Thinking combinations of secure TCP, like every single generation of HTTP and HTML and for different protocols. How do you see MCP is obviously a boon because things can talk to each other in the world of AI. What do you see, and maybe you know something internally about that Microsoft are working on, because there are standards bodies and things that are evolving these standards. Where do you see these protocols going so that you have much easier agent conversations that can pass all kinds of metadata between them?
In terms of where we're going, things change on a daily basis, and it's hard for me to predict. What I will say is, from the customers that I've been working with, the MCP generally seems to be pretty widely well received in terms of its ability to connect into different systems and do things. And I'd say that MCP probably will continue to be one of the premier platforms. The thing to note, though, is that traditional APIs are still there and still work, and we don't have to just put an MCP wrapper on everything just because we can. And so I think sometimes, if a read call is required, why build an MCP server around that? Let's just hit that read API and pull that information out, and stick with the way that we've always done things. But I think I wouldn't be the right person to comment or speculate on where I think things are going. I don't think I'm close enough to the industry standards and bodies to really give a comment on that. But what I can see from what I've seen is that MCP does feel like it's here to stay. Agent to agent, that's another protocol which we see. Personally, I haven't seen that much of it. That's not to say it's not a valid protocol, but it feels like a protocol that will be useful soon. When we have these network of agents and we're connecting to them. The problem I find, or I think about with stuff like agent to agent, is that it's going to need to be quite a quick protocol, because there's going to be latency. You've got one agent that's got an LLM and some other brains and gubbins in it, and it's making its own calls, and then it's talking to another agent that's doing all this, and it's how long am I waiting for this reply? So that's the only thing I would be interested to see, how that progresses. But my customers, I haven't really seen that much for agent to agent communication, only when MCP is not an option.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Or the occasions where we have an agent built in a certain framework in a different cloud, and we have this one and we're trying to connect the two. But it's I don't know. It doesn't feel as mature as MCP.
Right. Okay. So one question that I've been wanting to ask you, again, another contentious question. Please feel absolutely free to be dishonest. I'm not going to hold it against you. When you look at the cloud landscape, and everybody's racing towards AI, from Google, Microsoft, and AWS. Have you seen things in Google and AWS and thought, we need to be building these features or these things in Microsoft?
Do you know what? It's an interesting question. The reality of my role is I'm just in Microsoft all the time. So I'm not actually in the GCP terminals and AWS portals as much as maybe I would like to be, because it's good to see what others are doing. I think the clouds have been interesting in terms of the models themselves, and it does feel like model access, depending on which cloud you are, is getting better. So, for example, with stuff like OpenAI and the new agreements with Microsoft, you can now serve OpenAI models through AWS and other clouds, and I think that's a good thing. Obviously, commercially was a great thing that Microsoft had that a foothold on the OpenAI models through Azure. But I think for the market and for AI adoption more generally, I think it's better that everyone has choice, no matter which cloud that they're using, that they can use different models. I think some of the things that, with other clouds, models is one, but with the clouds, the things that, a lot of the conversations I'm having is the model's one thing, but what about the controls around that? How do I evaluate the AI system and do that in a good way? How do I put the safety and guardrails around that so that the AI doesn't respond with something I don't want it to? And Azure has controls, AWS and Google have controls. And I think what we're seeing is a maturity of those aspects. And I think for this kind of responsible AI kind of framework that everyone wants to, kind of ultimately strive to get to, we need to invest in those tools. And so, again, because I'm not in those portals, I couldn't tell you that this specific service within AWS I wish we had in Azure or something like that. But what I will say is, the thing that is really critical with a lot of the conversations I'm having is the guardrails around AI. And so if there were stuff in the Google ecosystem that were really good at evaluations that Azure doesn't have, I would say, I would like that. Yeah, because it's all those other things that people don't think about, but in the real world, it's pretty important.
We talked about some of these when we were in our workshop together around content and content moderation and responsible AI, hugely important. I've got 2 more questions before I'm going to open everything to the audience, and then you're in real trouble.
Do you know what? I read the description of this event, which made me laugh, which was, ask me anything, brackets, within reason. That really made me laugh.
I got AI to write that, but it suggested I shouldn't. But yeah, so my first question is, there was an announcement recently that Microsoft have released their own models, the
MAI models.
MAI models. What can we expect to see going forward? Because up until now, there hasn't been a presence at that formative level. How do you see things playing out?
I'd say that Microsoft internal capability will continue to ramp up in this space. I think it's good for someone like Microsoft to have foundational models that we own and run. I think it's good for the market as well, because the reality is more customers, more choice, better access, better cost, etc. So I think it's a good thing. In terms of that org, I'm not that close to the Microsoft AI team, but I do know that their presence has significantly increased. Obviously, there was the transition from a lot of the Inflection AI team to Microsoft through Mustafa Suleyman, kind of transition into Microsoft, and I definitely have seen that team has grown and in capability, and some of those MAI models in terms of benchmarks look very impressive actually. So yeah, I expect that with the investment that team is getting, we're going to probably see more foundational models. And also, I think that team is very focused on the consumer side of things, because obviously with Copilot, you have the Copilot that a lot of us in the room probably know, which is the business Copilot. But there is obviously the everyday, ChatGPT equivalent that I think the MAI team are quite close to as well. So I'd expect to see some interesting stuff there. What I have seen actually, which is interesting, is customers coming to me and showing me stuff from the consumer Copilot experience and asking, can we get that in the work experience? And it's funny, in my Microsoft head, I'm like, that's a different product team that's working on those two things, but it's both says Copilot. But it's interesting, seeing what they're experimenting with in the consumer world and seeing what sticks. And I've definitely seen some of the real-time audio and talking capability of the consumer Copilot be really good, and that capability has trickled down into now the work Copilot. So it's kind of a bit of a test bed. It's better to test with consumers rather than businesses that are reliant on the technology. But yeah, I would say I would expect that capability to continue, and I'd probably expect more models over the time. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to that. I've from my own community, from my own MVP community, I've had a lot of good feedback over the models. So long may it continue. So my last question, and I think this is probably one of my favourites, because you're in a room full of science geeks as well, so hopefully they'll love this too. But again, another announcement recently was the Majorana 2, the quantum chip, and Microsoft are the only company that are in the topological quantum qubit space. So they've got a technique which other companies are doing different things. How are you prepping yourself for this as a customer journey, given that within a few years we could have usable quantum machines? Yeah. And are customers already coming to you to bring that conversation, or other people within Microsoft?
I think military customers are definitely interested in it. I mean, obviously with the advent of what quantum computing promises, traditional levels of encryption are completely toast, right? So you could break, your typical levels of encryption quite easily. You hear of nation states that are what I call data banking. So they're pulling encrypted traffic from military feeds, saving them for later decryption should quantum computing ever become a thing, and become commercially viable and usable, right? So the conversations I've had on it typically are with military or defense customers that are kind of obviously interested in it. I don't know. I think it's an interesting one. I'm in two minds because I'm always really interested in new and emerging technology. It does scare me a little bit. I think we have to use it in the right way. The same way with the way we use AI. What excites me about stuff like quantum is, we could discover new drugs within minutes and hours, and we could develop new treatments or discover new molecules in ways that are impossible today because the calculations would take 100 years to run. So that sort of stuff about quantum really does excite me. I am personally a little bit concerned about the security impacts of that in terms of what to do. There are obviously quantum safe cryptography technologies that are out there, and a lot of the military customers are kind of exploring. But yeah, in terms of quantum, my personal thing, I'm split. I'm in two minds. I don't know, and I'm not close enough to that product to really comment.
Based on what you know about Microsoft, and also I think Microsoft has been one of these companies that I've always revered because they're incredibly good at reinventing themselves and their business models over the years, just to keep being successful. Do you see a change in cadence? Because what I've seen over the years is that sometimes Microsoft has struggled with getting into verticals, but with this incredible quantum machine, which for the time being isn't going to sit on people's laptops. It's going to be some super cool thing in a data center, which is going to cost tens of millions of dollars. Do you see a change in the nature of maybe how Microsoft does business so that you have stronger partnerships with companies like AstraZeneca and that are doing the drug discovery or these things?
I think, in similar ways that we've seen some of these newer AI models that have now been caught up in export control and all sorts of stuff, right? I think slow releases of technology that's absolutely foundationally game-changing will realistically be the route, right? And this is what I was saying about the concern, but the reality is Microsoft as a responsible company, there's no way we would just release quantum technology out in the wild. It would be through, partnerships and with the likes of drug companies to accelerate the right things that we want to happen. So in terms of Microsoft reinventing itself in that ecosystem, I'm confident that we would. The concern is when if stuff like quantum becomes more open source or available. Now, will it be because it needs to be cooled to nearly zero Kelvin, and there's all these things, but with nation state backing used in the wrong way, who knows what could go on there. So I'm confident in the Microsoft side of things, and I've actually had a couple of calls with some of the scientists in the quantum team a few years ago, and was really impressive. It was funny, the conversation we had was that obviously they're a very expensive part of Microsoft. They're doing all of this research, and the kind of the dichotomy, back to what I was talking about with product, was we need to and this back to those announcements, we need to show improvement and to continue getting the funding, but at the same time, we need to balance things at the same time. So it's even quantum's not can't get away from that.
I know. It's from a science geek perspective. I think it's fascinating. It's the next best.
Yeah, I think so. And I think of all the big technologies that you hear about on the horizon, it is the one that you look at and you think that could fundamentally change everything.
Impact. Yeah. Exactly. Wonderful. Well, listen, Alex, absolutely fantastic speaking with you.
It's been good fun.
Thank you so much. And everybody, feel free to ask Alex questions.
We'll grab pizza, and if you've got any other questions you want to ask one-to-one, go for it.
Beautiful.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.